Finally, Dr. Joanna Williams, who's one of my favourite writers on education, indeed on feminism. She's an academic, education editor of Spike. She's the author of Consuming Higher Education, Why Learning Can't Be Bought. So I'm going to get her to just give us a 60-second, what's your elevator pitch? Why does it agitate you, this identity politics?
Well, I'll just start by perhaps stating the obvious, but I think identity politics is everywhere nowadays. And we have seen it so much this weekend, where nearly everybody who speaks in any of the discussions feels the need to preface their remarks by saying, speaking as a woman, speaking as a mother, speaking as an academic. And it's these kind of biological, often biological, but not always kind of assumed cultural identities that have really come to define each other. We use them to define each other. I don't think identity politics is eating itself. I wish identity politics would eat itself. And I think that there are two key things that I'd really like to bring out today that I think are problematic with identity politics, the way it's being framed today. The first is just it's incredibly limiting. It's about defining ourselves based on the most biological, the most boring aspects of our identity and not being able to move beyond that. This is not transformational, this is limiting. Second thing is that often claims to identity are based on victim status, and we become involved in what's termed a kind of oppression sweepstakes, where to be able to maintain our identity, we have to outdo other groups based on who is the most victimized, and I think that's incredibly unhelpful. One very final quick point. I actually think the name identity politics is wrong. I think this has nothing to do with politics. I think it's more about narcissism. It's about a complete obsession with the self, and we can't relate to the world other than how we see ourselves in it.
Okay, thanks, Jo.
It's the people who you might term the proper feminists, the second wave feminists, who I think are really responsible for a lot of this, because it's the second wave feminists with their slogan, the personal is political, that have really paved the way for the generation of feminists who you're now so scornful of, rightfully scornful of. But that slogan, the personal is political, and particularly the way that it's played out within academia, for example, basically said that any objective fact about the world is worthless compared to people's subjective experiences, and it's how people experience things in a very subjective way that counts. And obviously then you completely lose the ability to evaluate any concept, any knowledge, any political position, because it's all based on your feelings. It was really a case of bringing feelings into the classroom and feelings into politics. It's second wave feminists who really started this.
Jo.
I actually don't think there was ever anything good about the slogan, the personal is political. I mean, I think perhaps you could argue that it opened up a broader range of issues to debate. Arguably, that would have happened anyway. I think the personal is political was always terrible, and three reasons, and Julie's just outlined two of them very nicely. First of all, this idea that it pictures women as a class, all women together as a class, as opposed to all men together as a class. That's just rubbish. Women are not a class. I've got far more in common with many men than I have with plenty of other women. And by in common, I mean even in terms of kind of vested interests. If I want to secure a good life for myself, a good life for other people, I'm far better doing that by joining with men than by associating purely with other women. Second reason why I think nothing at all positive about the personal is political that Julie's identified is that it completely blurs the boundaries between public and private. And I think we're really seeing the consequences of that playing out in a lot of political issues that we see nowadays. So two of the debates I've been involved with this weekend have been looking at the issue of consent, sexual consent. And I think it's this whole notion that the personal is political that erodes the sphere between the public and private that makes things like sexual consent a suitable topic for a classroom discussion, that children should be taught about consent, and I really don't think that's at all helpful. Third reason is the thing that I touched upon earlier, that it moves the subjective, it privileges feelings and subjectivity above rationality and objectivity.
Okay.
So nothing positive about the personal is political.
Can I just...
I think these three questions that were posed down here about is there a difference between who you are, and what you do are the kind of key questions which are people are expected to answer nowadays. But I think I'm not going to answer them, but I think the fact that they are the key question shows that one of the things I think really highlights, it drives this debate, is this collapse between the public and the private. And I think this is absolutely crucial. So this idea that you can't have a private life anymore, that your private life needs to be out in public, that you need to kind of wear as a slogan on a T-shirt exactly who you think you are and what you do at every available opportunity. And you can't have a kind of private sphere and a public sphere. I think it's really important. And I think what that has led to then is this culture of narcissism, and this culture of narcissism that is shaped by the collapse of the public and private, also shaped by the collapse of class politics. I think Julie had a really good way of summarising that. You know, what was important was the class you fought for rather than the class that you came from. You know, it's that collapse of class politics that has helped create this culture of narcissism. And I think the problem, my main problem with this, and I think it was really nicely encapsulated in the debate we had just earlier about rape culture, is people were asking about material politics. Where's the place for material politics nowadays? Well, it's nowhere, because we've got this emphasis on the subjective. So what was said on the panel in the rape culture discussion was it actually makes no difference whatsoever whether the rate of rape is 1 in 50 or 1 in 5, completely irrelevant, because all that matters is people's subjective experiences of living in a rape culture. So that way that you can completely disparage any objective fact means that material politics just doesn't happen anymore.
Sorry.
I think we've got to be very, very careful about saying that personal experiences are facts. I think there are some personal things that are facts. You can look at how much someone gets paid. You could look at how many times they were stopped by the police. You could look at how much they have to pay for their mortgage or their rent, etc. And you can look at facts in that context. As soon as we move beyond facts that can be weighed and measured like that, we move into the subjective sphere, and then you blur the lines between the subjective and the objective. And it's because that has taken place so much that we can even ask questions like, how do we politicise the experiences of different groups? Which I think is an interesting question. And I think it's, like I say, a question which stems from the dominance of identity politics. I think identity politics just gets in the way of real politics. I think the most important word that's been said in this debate so far was said over here about universalism. To my mind, politics is about winning people over to your argument. I mean, that's democracy, essentially. It's about winning people over to what you think by having those arguments out with people. But if we're all just defined by our own individual experiences, and everybody's individual experiences are so different, then you don't actually ever attempt to do that thing of winning people over to your argument. You're just respecting people for their personal experiences. So
okay, leave it there.
Is my response...
Sorry, Claire, can I just come back on that very, very quickly? So if you look at the issue of gay rights, for example, you could look at the law, you could look at inequalities in the law, and those are social facts. Inequalities in the law are social facts. The only way you change that, though, is not by retreating into a space to say, I'm a gay man and I experience life as a gay man. You have to actually win the public over to your argument by saying...
Stop.
First of all, on the whole transgenderism issue, I think it's completely bonkers. I think the obsession with it is absolutely nuts. But I think it's quite a useful illustration of how identity politics leads to this complete disjuncture between ideas and reality, and also a nice illustration of how narcissism is driving identity politics, because essentially it seems to me the transgenderism thing is about saying everybody else in the world has to go along with my fantasies, and there's a real narcissism that underpins that notion. Secondly, on the cultural appropriation issue, and again this ties in with the gender issue, I think there's just absolutely terrible ideas that make me want to weep, because again there's an underpinning of narcissism there, but it also just shows how this whole identity politics becomes so fixed and so deterministic. So you have your culture, it's in a box, and you're not allowed out of that box. You're not allowed to aspire towards any culture that goes beyond that which has been assigned towards you. Finally, just on the pushback against identity politics, and yeah, completely agree, it's worse. The pushback that we're seeing nowadays in the form of MRA, in various other forms, often tends to be worse because it tends to be kind of hyper identity politics on acid. And I think the only way that we can truly get beyond identity politics is to make the case for universalism nowadays, and to look at what we've got in common rather than constantly obsessing about what it is that divides and separates us.
Thank you. And